Dinotopia is a science fiction and fantasy children's book series made by author and illustrator James Gurney. The first of these books, titled Dinotopia: A Land Apart from Time from 1993, tells the story of a man named Arthur Dennison and his son Will, who are marooned on the titular island after a shipwreck. They soon learn the island is home to a civilization of both humans and dinosaurs that, for the most part, coexist in harmony. Along with the newcomers adjusting to their new lives in their beginning years on Dinotopia, the first book also explores many elements of the island, including the fauna and flora, the many ecosystems and cities, and the culture of the Dinotopians. The book is set up similarly to that of a journal to immerse the readers into a world as if they were exploring it next to its characters. However, as he progressed through the production of the first book, Gurney eventually realized that the world of Dinotopia was far too big and grand to fit into one story. That and the overall reception for the first Dinotopia book was immensely positive. According to one post on his blog site, after the book was published, Gurney went on a huge promotional campaign, prompted by the book's publishing company, Turner Publishing Incorporated. He would partake in TV interviews with Good Morning America and Larry King Live, he'd visit multiple cities and bookstores, answer questions, sign books, all within a 3-month-long book tour. At one point, Gurney even visited a school in Connecticut dressed as Arthur Dennison and paraded around campus with the kids whose teachers had done a unit on Dinotopia. Sounds like a damn good school to me. At one point in his post, Gurney would say this: "During the tour, I met a lot of kids and received boxes of letters. I try to respond to each one, and I've been very pleased recently to meet some of the kids who wrote to me and even sent me their drawings. They're all grown up now, and some are artists, which makes me really proud of them for sticking with it." Bottom line, the book was a massive success, and it's no surprise that people likely wanted some kind of continuation to it, so he decided he would make a sequel. He got to work creating most of the art for it between September of 1993 and January of 1995, setting himself a production rate of about 10 pages per month, and spending at least a couple of months to write the story. By fall of 1995, Gurney would release his sequel titled Dinotopia: The World Beneath. Throughout the first book, many of the island's residents had referenced an underground world that they referred to as the World Beneath, which is a series of cave systems that hold the many answers to the mysteries of Dinotopia. The story revealed that millions of years ago, an extinction event wiped out the dinosaurs, but many of them were able to seek refuge within these cave systems until the surface world became livable to them once again. They would emerge from these cave systems and since then lived on the surface of the island, where they would eventually make their first encounters with humans. The World Beneath would intrigue Arthur because despite holding a lot of significance to the dinosaurs, time has left much of this world forgotten, and being the scientist that he is, he's ready to explore this world and find out its many mysteries. And he does. However, when Gurney realized the extent that he wanted to explore Dinotopia, he decided to end the first book off with a cliffhanger. The mysteries of the World Beneath would stay that way until a couple of years later when he released the second book, which details the aftermath of Arthur's adventure along with his second expedition into the underground world, where he discovers so much more. We have a whole new world to explore, so let's take a look at the World Beneath.
From author James Gurney comes a new adventure in the land of Dinotopia. A perilous journey. A mysterious quest. A dangerous mission. There's action and adventure at every turn. Dinotopia: The World Beneath.
The World Beneath starts off on March 12, 1867, about 5 years after Arthur and his son Will first awoke on the shores of Dinotopia. During their time on the island, the Denisons have made a home here, with Will managing to succeed in being the first dolphinback to become a skybax rider, and Arthur being one of the first modern explorers to venture into the underground world and return with new stories and discoveries. Yet despite this, Arthur has had a tough time acclimating himself to the more saurian residents of the island. As was discussed in the first book, the residents of Dinotopia consist of both humans and dinosaurs, as the two groups are considered as equals in their society. Arthur has a tough time accepting this, not always seeing eye to eye with that line of thinking. but still tries his best to respect the customs and traditions of the island. That being said, he seems more interested in messing around and experimenting with machines like the Dragoncopter. The book starts with Arthur, Will, Nalab, the Dinotopian librarian, Cirrus, Will's Quetzalcoatlus Skybacks, and Bix, the Protoceratops guide, translator, and close friend to our main characters, who are all at the top of a building in Waterfall City where Arthur is preparing to launch a test flight with his newly made Dragoncopter, a Victorian-style flying machine that, according to the behind-the-scenes segment of Gurney's book, was inspired by Meganura and is made with wings that were intended to mimic dragonfly wings so that the machine could hover and even move backwards. However, things don't go as planned. Given his experience with flying, Will tests out the flying machine, but when it's launched off the building, it's not long before the Dragoncopter's engine gives out, rendering all controls to it unresponsive. Will is forced to jump out of the machine and onto Cirrus's back, who was there for exactly this reason, just in case the machine failed on Will. The Dragoncopter then crashes into a waterfall, but luckily Will makes it back safely onto solid ground. After the failed experiment, the denizens head back to Arthur's lab, where he reveals to his son that Dinotopia may not rely on steam to power their machines, or really rely on any machines for that matter, but the island is home to a strange power, one that's transmitted into a stone that Arthur had discovered during his first expedition to the world beneath. The stone, which we later learn to be a sunstone, has the ability to contain the energy of sunlight within itself that can then refract it in what the book describes as a reverse spectrum. It's a peculiar type of science to Arthur, and the sunstone is just one of several artifacts that he found during his trip through the underground cave system. The trip was cut short after Arthur and Bix came up to a large door that couldn't be opened, and thus Arthur is determined to go back down there to find more answers because he wants to learn more about the sunstones and their abilities. This prompts Arthur to call a meeting with the dinosaur and human elders to propose another expedition to the world beneath. And this is where we learn about some of the mythos of Dinotopia. When Arthur reveals his finding from his first expedition to the Elders, they relay an old story from the scrolls of Poseidos, which was an ancient Dinotopian city that was thought to have existed at one point, but in more recent times has been seen as more of a fantastical tale. According to the scrolls, there was once a king named Ogthar who was half human, half dinosaur. King Ogthar traveled into the earth where he collected a series of shining stones along with a clutch of golden eggs. He would return to the surface and brought the stones and the eggs to the city of Poseidos, where the stones gave the great city the power of light and the golden eggs hatched out metallic machines that resembled dinosaurs. However, the sea became enraged with this wave of loud change caused by machinery and light, and as a result, drowned Poseidos. But not before Ogthar was able to secure the sunstones by giving them to another king along with immense treasures. Who this other king was isn't known, as there are still many elements of this story that remain a mystery. The comparison is made later in the story, but basically, Poseidos is the Dinotopia equivalent of the lost city of Atlantis. And just like that story, many seem to believe in this lost city of Poseidos and have attempted to look for it in the hopes of seeking its treasures. But Arthur isn't interested in that. He wants to go beyond the doors that stopped him in his initial trip into the world beneath. While he wasn't able to get the door open, he was able to find a bronze key off of a human skeleton. It's revealed the key is only half of a whole, and when the two halves are put together, they're able to unlock that door that stood in the way of Arthur's initial expedition. When the news broke out, many approached Arthur, lining up outside of the hall the meeting was taking place in to offer their items to the scientists to see if it was the right fit. None of them fit, but eventually Arthur would find the second half of the key from a woman named Oriana Nazkova. But Oriana had no interest in giving the key to Arthur. In fact, quite the opposite. She wants the second half of what's rightfully hers, because as it turns out, the two halves of the key once belonged to her parents, of which one half was stolen from them and the other was given to her. Arthur explains that he needs both parts of the key for his expedition, and Oriana sees this as an opportunity to learn more about her past and invites herself on the trip, much to Arthur's concern. But seeing no other choice, he relents and lets her go with them. Knowing they'll need a guide, Lee Crabbe also offers his services. If you don't remember, Lee Crabbe was one of the characters we met in the first book. The one who doesn't like Dinotopia that much and has tried countless times to get off the island to no avail. It's likely he wants to go just for the sake of the treasures, but Arthur is convinced to let him go after learning that Crabbe owns a submersible called the Remora that could get them through the entrance point that Arthur and Bix presumably exited in the vessel they made in the first book from their first underground excursion. So with that, Arthur, Bix, Oriana, and Crabbe take a raft and paddle out of Waterfall City and down the Palanga River towards Dolphin Bay where the Remora submersible is. However, they soon learn that Crabbe doesn't actually own the Remora anymore, as he had lost it in a gamble to some of the barflies at the Blackfish Tavern establishment that's just off the bank of Dolphin Bay. But this little hiccup in the road is resolved quickly after Crabbe is able to win the Remora back with a quick gamble in a game called Spinners. With that, the four are back on their trajectory to enter the undersea caves that lead to the world beneath. However, given the distance, they're helped by a small group of Chronosaurs who agree to tow the Remora for part of their journey over there, but this is cut short after they're suddenly attacked by a Dunkleosteus. The fight leaves the Remora damaged but still operable, however the fight also drove the Chronosaurus away, leaving the crew to travel the rest of the way to the caverns on their own. Before we continue with the story, as always, I just want to take a moment to admire some of the really cool art that Gurney made for his book, especially the underwater sequences. The art depicts all sorts of oceanic organisms like trilobites, eurypterids, ammonites, nautiloids, and so on. As I mentioned in the first video, accuracy is very important to Gurney, and he has a whole process when it comes to representing dinosaurs in his artwork.
After completing Waterfall City, I got the idea of painting other panoramic scenes of lost empires. And the first idea that came to mind was a parade of people and dinosaurs. This painting grew out of the ideas that were emerging from science in the 1980s. The idea that dinosaurs were more like birds rather than like reptiles. This revolutionized everything. If I could imagine that dinosaurs were warm-blooded and intelligent and dynamic creatures, what would it be like to live with dinosaurs? So I began by traveling to museums, talking to scientists, going on location, looking at dinosaur bones and footprints to try to visualize, to imagine what these creatures would look like. Often that meant doing studies of dinosaur skeletons in museums and to actually come in contact with the physical evidence of dinosaurs.
So when it came to making the sea life, he also took to the fossil records to recreate them as accurately as possible. According to a post on the topic on his blog site Gurney Journey, in keeping with the authenticity of the creatures of Dinotopia, several of the animals that Arthur Dennison notates in his sketchbook are actual fossils from the Devonian Burgess Shale. The animal on the right is a eurypterid, also known as a sea scorpion, an extinct form that sometimes grew larger than a man. But this also includes other strange-looking creatures like Opabinia and Hallucigenia. Continuing the story, the group finally make their way through the entrance point of the cave system. According to the 20th Anniversary Edition book, which contains some of the behind-the-scenes for the making of the world beneath, Gurney's original idea for this entrance was that it was going to be a sea cave that could be entered by raft, but was later changed to be more inaccessible, likely to keep the mythos and treasure of this tale more valuable and mysterious. But despite the struggles of getting through the cave systems, the group managed to find the doors that Arthur and Bix were unable to get through in their first expedition. Now with two halves of the key, when put together, they're able to finally unlock and open the door, revealing a beautiful and wide world of strange rock structures. The group were finally within the world beneath. From here, the story actually breaks from Arthur and his group and instead focuses on Will. Like I mentioned earlier, Dinotopia, the land apart from time, was set up in a journal-like format, with all of the information within the book being documented by our main characters from their first-person perspective. It does a good job putting the reader into the shoes of the denizens, as it gives off the impression that we're learning about Dinotopia as they are. However, I noticed that the world beneath takes a different approach. While still set up in this journal-like format, the story seems to have changed from a first-person perspective to now a third-person perspective. Not that there's anything wrong with telling a story that way. I just thought it was interesting how Gurney decided to change things up a bit for his second book. But that's to be expected. The first Dinotopia was more of an introduction to the world than anything. It wasn't structured like a traditional story, having more of a balance between the narrative and the exploration of the island. The world beneath tips that balance by being more structured like a traditional story, following the beats that lead up to a climactic event that gets resolved by the end of it. Again, nothing wrong with telling a story in that format. The book still has a great deal of exploration, introducing new environments, new wildlife, new communities, so it's nice to see the style isn't completely non-existent in this continuation. While Arthur and the others are underground, Will is in the skies with Sylvia flying their skybacks above the rainy basin, which is the territory of the theropod dinosaurs that have shunned away the more civilized areas of Dinotopia. However, many Dinotopians still cut through the rainy basin to get to different areas of the island, and when they do, there's always a possibility of an attack from the large theropod dinosaurs, so certain precautions are put in place so that no one, dies. The dinosaurs that usually lead the convoys heading into the rainy basin are typically fitted with armor in case of deadly bites, but Skyback's riders, in this case Will and Sylvia, are also requested to join in on trips like these to help distract any attacking carnivores away from the convoy. The trip is an urgent one, as one of the newly born baby dinosaurs from a hatchery in a community called Bonaba, who is also the grand hatchling of one of the elder dinosaurs, a triceratops named Brokhorn, is sick, and the medicine to heal the poor baby comes from the horsetail tree plant that can only be found in the rainy basin. The drawbridge that separates the rainy basin from the region of Bonaba is lifted and the convoy is off, with Will and Cirrus tasked to scout ahead for tyrannosaurs. When they don't see any, Cirrus is drawn to something strange in the woods. When they land, it's revealed to be ancient ruins with strange friezes on the walls depicting humans with snake tails slithering out of the mouths of theropod dinosaurs, and artifacts of dinosaur-human hybrids, indicating that Ogthar has some significance to this temple. As interesting as this place is, Will isn't able to stay for long because all of a sudden, the pair are attacked by a Tyrannosaurus Rex. He's able to make a last-minute getaway with Cirrus and returns to the convoy being attacked by a pack of Tyrannosaurs. At this point, the book decides to take a break from Will's story and continues on with Arthur's. They end up getting lost during their travels through the underground world, but in doing so, they discover so much more about it. Seemingly endless systems of wide open spaces filled with strange but beautiful rock structures and crystalline formations that are guessed by Arthur to be the sunstones in their natural state. This is a good time to talk about one of the inspirations for this part of the story. Shortly after finishing the first Dinotopia book and sending it off to go get printed, Gurney would take a research trip to Puerto Rico in 1992. There, he would go on a cave exploration trip to the Camui Caverns, I think that's how you pronounce it, where he would witness the many wonders of this sheltered world, including observing some of the wildlife, swimming through the underground lakes, traversing through the large chambers of natural limestone caves, and even finding carvings of Taino deities. There was even a point where Gurney mentions that after their excursion, his guide, the only other person that accompanied him on this cave exploration trip, had told the author that when they were passing by some of the muddy waters within the caves, he had stepped on the dead body of a person from a previous trip into the caves. No doubt a very eye-opening experience for Gurney, but also one that likely gave him the inspiration he needed to make the world beneath. It was also on this trip he would go snorkeling to view some of the coral formations for all of the underwater sequences that occurred prior to this point in the book. It just goes to show just how important these kind of real-life references are to Gurney, who's known for taking mundane and simple things from life and just making art out of it, recreating it on paper with pencil, oil, and paint. It also explains just how Gurney is able to make his art so detailed. That being said, there's a quote from Gurney that I really liked when I was doing research for this video. Despite having those kinds of on-hand references for his art, he's also stated at one point in an article by The Morning Call, an illustration has to go where the camera can't. A painting from the glory days of civilization or a dinosaur. Cross-sections of dirt or when you want to show a shipwreck when the water is too murky to photograph. And it's because of this line of thinking, Dinotopia is able to exist. Going back to the story, many things occur during the group's trek across the cave system. They find several more types of sunstones that seem to emit powers to different extents, depending on their shape, size, piezoelectric, and reverse refractive properties. Then, when Oriana finds time to be alone, she has a vision of her mother, who then transforms several times into different women, all possessing a familiar look of Oriana herself. She eventually understands that all of those figures she envisioned were a part of her lineage of family from her mother's side, finally being able to witness a part of her life that she's never seen before. And the group also find an artifact depicting the dinosaur-human hybrid king of Poseidos himself, Ogthar. But that's not even the most interesting thing they find. The group eventually come across the severed mechanical leg of a large machine, much to Arthur's excitement. Traveling deeper into the caverns soon reveal a massive opening with water canals and rock structures emitting light. The group have stumbled upon what they believe to be the laboratory where the large crystalline materials are taken to be shaped into the sunstones. But it's soon revealed that this place also houses several dinosaur-shaped vehicles that Arthur calls Strutters. The Strutters come in many shapes and sizes, based after many types of prehistoric creatures that inhabit Dinotopia. And Arthur soon figures out that they're powered by the energy emitted from the sunstones, which in turn get their power from the sun. That's why there are large rock structures that provide a source of light, as according to a chart the book provides, these rock structures are strategically built throughout the caverns closer and closer to the surface to collect any sunlight that manages to break through the surface of the underground world. The sunlight is then directed to the deeper facilities of the world beneath where the Strutter storage is located to power up the sunstones that, when placed within the brackets on the machines, gives them power. When the group learns this, Crab aims the ray of light at one of the machines and brings it to life. With that, the group now have their own modes of transportations to make their way back to the surface world, with Crab manning a strutter that looks like some sort of arthropod, and Arthur, Oriana, and Bix riding in one that resembles a triceratops. When they reach the exit, they find themselves in the middle of the rainy basin, where they're encountered by a lone Styracosaurus guard who fills them in on the convoy trip and their encounter with the hostile Tyrannosaurs. Luckily, Arthur and the rest of the group are able to catch up with the convoy using their strutters. However, the machines are not indestructible, as evident from a sudden T-Rex attack that almost destroys them. The T-Rex rips the head off of the Triceratops strutter, but luckily isn't able to damage the rest of the machine, which is still operable. Arthur then hits the nitro on his strutter and zooms away from the T-Rex and towards the drawbridge as it's being lifted. But with one final jump, the group are just barely able to make it to safety. With that, the medicine is given to Brokhorn's grand hatchling, Arthur is reunited with his son, and a celebration is given for the explorers to honor their discovery and help with the tail end of the convoy's expedition into the rainy basin. Arthur also takes this time to show off the strutters that they found during their expedition to the locals of Bonaba. To bring these robot dinosaurs to life with oil paintings, Gurney employs the same method that he uses to paint his dinosaurs. As I explained in the first video, Gurney used polymer clay and other materials to make models and maquettes of the dinosaurs and characters, and then uses that as a reference for shadows and poses when painting them. He does the same with the Strutters, designing a model of one out of plastic robot model kits and sculptor's putty. He would base the design off of a ceratopsian skeleton before making his initial concept piece for it in a more Victorian style, before changing it to give it a more industrial look in its finished product. And Crab's arthropod strutter maquette was made from scratch entirely out of polymer clay before being put to paper. As far as the purpose for the machines in the context of the book, they were meant to be better versions of the dinosaurs. Because their machines, their stamina and strength is much better and long-lasting compared to living creatures, and all the work the dinosaurs do can be done with the machines at a greater and even more efficient pace. At least, that's the kind of thinking Arthur has. It's kind of an interesting reflection of our own world, which as the years go by is getting more and more comfortable with the idea of replacing people with robots and AI. That's actually a pretty big theme in this book, because while Arthur is busy expressing the potential of machines and technology and the good it could do for Dinotopia, Oriana is trying to convince him that his hyper-focus on these machines have blinded him to the real beauty of Dinotopia. Like, you know, the small fact that it's just an island full of real-life dinosaurs. That being said, it's not like Arthur is looking to fill the island with just Strutters or even replace the dinosaurs completely. It's clear he has good intentions, but it's blinding him from seeing the greater picture of what makes Dinotopia a beautiful place. But sometimes it feels like there's a lack of nuance when the topic of the ethics behind the use of machines and technology is brought up among the characters. However, the actions speak louder than the words. Because there are points where the story does show the Strutters being used in a way that helps the characters, like their run-in with the Tyrannosaurs in the Rainy Basin. If not for the Strutters' speed and even presence, the Tyrannosaurs wouldn't have been distracted away from the rest of the convoy, and Arthur, Oriana, and Bix likely wouldn't have made it out of that region alive. But shortly after that whole ordeal, when Arthur is showing off the Strutter to a small crowd of people in Bonaba, the machine also proves to be unpredictable at times when it starts going off on its own, causing a minor ruckus across the community. There's a point in the book where Arthur and Oriana are debating about the topic, but it also showcases just how close these two have gotten during their trip to the world beneath. Another action that further expresses the nuances of these machines are how they're used in the hands of certain people. With Arthur, he clearly wants to use the Strutters for good, however, for someone like Crab, he wants to use the Strutters to get what he wants, and what he wants is treasure. When Arthur tells Will about Ogthar, Will recognizes the figure from the artifacts he saw at the ancient ruins within the Rainy Basin, which the ruins are called the Palace of Kings. Arthur realizes that this must be the place where Ogthar passed on the Sunstones and treasures before the sinking of Poseidos. The other king the scrolls had mentioned were likely talking about the king of the dinosaurs, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. However, Crab had realized this before they did, and had already made his way back into the Rainy Basin with his Strutter and Arthur's notebooks in search of these ruins. So Arthur, Oriana, and Bix make their way in their own Strutter to stop him before it's too late. But the dense jungle had forced the trio to leave their Strutter behind temporarily and proceed the rest of the journey on foot. It's not long before they eventually run into some of the theropod inhabitants, but luckily for them, the encounter is not a deadly one. The group run into a pair of young Giganotosaurs named Bloodfire and Stantall, roughhousing before one of them gets their foot stuck in a tangle of logs. Seeing him in trouble, Bix peacefully calls out to the juveniles and makes their presence known. Arthur then frees Stantall from the logs, who is grateful enough to want the group to meet his father, Stinktooth, much to Arthur's worry. I explained in my first video that the way things worked with the theropods within the Rainy Basin is that they're not evil creatures, but rather ones that simply don't agree with the more civilized way the dinosaurs live in the rest of Dinotopia, so they keep to themselves in their own way within their own region. This book explores a bit more of that, showing that the theropod dinosaurs, while definitely living a more wild and brutal life that's not tamed by the reins of a strict society, they still seem to have their own way of running things within the Rainy Basin. According to the text within the book, "We don't have much choice but to go along," said Bix, "but don't worry. Bloodthirsty as they seem to outsiders, these creatures can be fiercely loyal, and they have a powerful sense of honor and justice. Because of your act of kindness, I believe we have just earned merit." As interesting as this sounds, the book doesn't really go too in depth with it, but with how the carnivores act with each other, it indicates some level of order within their groups. Because when Stantall takes Arthur, Oriana, and Bix to meet his father, they're greeted with all sorts of theropod dinosaurs like Cryolophosaurus and Carnotaurus. But their first impression of Stinktooth comes when they make their way through a clearing and are charged at by a Tyrannosaur. Before the so-called Tyrant Lizard King had a chance to attack the group, a larger theropod breaks through the trees and scares the T-Rex into submission. While we're on the topic of the Giganotosaurus, from my understanding, this dinosaur wasn't initially included in the story. Fossil fragments of this dinosaur had initially been discovered between the late 80s and early 90s by amateur paleontologist Ruben D. Carolini, but a name wasn't assigned to it until 1995, around the same time Gurney was in the final art stages of the book's production. Paleontologist Michael Brett Sermon, Gurney's dinosaur consultant for his then upcoming book, notified the author of this new discovery of the Giganotosaurus, which was co-named by Argentinian paleontologist Dr. Rodolfo Coria. What was instantly fascinating about this carnivorous dinosaur is that, for the time, it was believed to be bigger than the king of the dinosaurs itself, the T-Rex. Gurney was interested enough in this discovery to include it in his book, and even got Coria's permission to be the first to paint a picture of it. According to Gurney's account of the story, I set to work to reconstruct the creature starting with the bones, the muscles, and the skin. When it came to coloring the dinosaur, I contacted Dr. Coria. "This is your dinosaur," I said. "What color do you want him to be?" "Color," he replied, "that's your problem." So based on colorful birds and reptiles, I took the artistic liberty of giving the dinosaur a bright color scheme to make him look as impressive as possible. And what resulted was a beautifully depicted Giganotosaurus with a really nice blend of colors. Of course, today's science will show that this isn't the most accurate depiction of Giganotosaurus, especially when it comes to the topic of its size comparison with Tyrannosaurus rex. While the prospect of a carnivorous dinosaur being larger than the king himself is enough to make anyone interested in it, modern science states that the Giganotosaurus' size was exaggerated. It's not exactly conclusive as to whether or not the Giganotosaurus was the biggest carnivorous dinosaur to ever exist, at least based on the sources that I've seen. However, it is considered to be one of the biggest theropod dinosaurs out there. In terms of length, height, and weight, the Giganotosaurus was around 40 to 43 feet long, about 23 feet tall, and weighed about 9 to 11 tons. But keep in mind, this is all based on estimates from limited fossil material. But just with these estimates, even if the Giganotosaurus was bigger than the T-Rex, it wasn't by much, because the largest T-Rex specimen was estimated to be around 42 feet long, about 19 feet tall, and nearing 10 tons in weight, though I will admit, some of these numbers do vary depending on the sources. But bottom line is, the Giganotosaurus's overall size, while possibly bigger than the T-Rex, isn't fully conclusive as of the recording of this video, and was exaggerated because the idea of a carnivore bigger than the T-Rex is an exciting idea and perfect to incorporate in a science fiction setting. Regardless of the information though, Gurney's depiction of it is still amazing. Alright, that's enough science. Going back to the story, when they approach Stinktooth, he recognizes them to be explorers that aren't trying to steal, but rather observe. So he lets them through to check out the ruins, and inside, they find a huge statue of Ogthar holding the stones, surrounded by piles of treasure. And among the treasure, they find even more information that continues the forgotten myth of the lost city of Poseidos. One of the things they find is a gold head sculpture of Almistra, who's revealed to be the queen that married King Ogthar. What's even more surprising is that they also find an old camera with daguerreotype photographs within it that shows direct evidence of the existence of Poseidos, and with it, all of its mechanical vehicles in action. It's revealed through the photos that the city of Poseidos was established on a smaller island in the eastern coast of Dinotopia by Sapphire Bay. On this island, there were architects that built these dinosaur-shaped machines in the hopes of creating a more mechanized civilization, but this resulted in the dinosaurs leaving Poseidos and seeking a home on the mainland of Dinotopia, as they had no place there anymore after essentially being replaced by the machines. Eventually, the city began to sink, not because the ocean was upset by them, but because the island was rested on a hollow section of the earth, which eventually caved in due to natural causes. While some of the survivors that managed to get off the island in time sought refuge on the coastal cities of Dinotopia, the king and his followers were determined to continue their mechanized civilization and took their equipment and Strutters into the world beneath, where they built labs, storage units, and transport canals within the caverns. But they couldn't live like this forever. Eventually, they would return to the surface world through an exit that led them to the rainy basin. With nothing but their treasure and sunstones left, they used it as an offering to the carnivores so that they can travel through the region without conflict. And after all these years, that same treasure has sat in that very temple that Arthur, Oriana, and Bix stand in their present day. But they aren't the only ones there, as Crab had already gathered some of the treasure and loaded it up on his strutter and plans to escape the island using maps that he's gathered to help him navigate through difficult waters, and use Arthur's notes to expose the island to the rest of the world. He then plans to come back to harvest the island of its riches and resources, along with getting rid of the Scalies, as he puts it. When he makes his presence clear to the group, he offers Arthur to go with him and split the profit of the treasure, but he refuses, prompting Crab to make make his getaway. He gets into his arthropod Strutter and quickly makes his way to the coast, destroying Arthur Strutter in the process. When Stinktooth learns of the situation, he and his mate allow Oriana and Arthur onto their backs and pursue Crab. The chase is eventually taken to the ocean, but given the Strutter's speed, Stinktooth is unable to catch up to it and is forced to stop when the waves get too violent for him to continue. But not before giving Arthur the chance to jump on and disabling the vehicle by pulling out the sunstone from its bracket and throwing it into the ocean. This causes Crab's Strutter to sink into the ocean, but before the two are left stranded, Will and Sylvia show up with their Skybaxes, Cirrus and Nimbus, and take the pair back to land. Then the book does something interesting. It shows the Strutter sinking down to the bottom of the ocean where the city of Poseidos lies. It's an interesting approach to take when the first book was structured as a journal with everything in it being recorded by our characters as they experienced it, but in this book there's no indication that they ever knew this was exactly where the lost city of Poseidos was, nor did Arthur ever know what was to become of his notebook, which was one of the only surviving objects from this event. The current would carry the book away from the island and out into the open ocean where it would be caught in the net by a Philippine fisherman named Diego Ramon. 7 months later by the San Ildefonso Peninsula. Despite being protected in oilskin, the book still had a lot of water damage to it, but it would still make its way to the library that Gurney would find it in the fictional scenario that started off the first book. With that, Dinotopia remains safe and untouched by the outside world, at least for now, all thanks to the efforts of Arthur, Oriana, Bix, Stinktooth, and his mate. The characters are honored while Crab is kept under strict watch by a pair of Stygimoloch guards. The story ends with Dinotopia at peace once again, with some going back to the comforts of their old lives and others starting a new one. What's amazing about Dinotopia is the fact that despite the world being limited to just an island setting, it's filled to the brim with history and adventures and mysteries, and the world beneath just does a good job in exemplifying that. There's just so much happening in this story. There's piezoelectric crystals powering dinosaur robots. There's a lost city that was once ran by a half-dinosaur, half-human king, at least according to their folklore. There's an underground exploration and treasure hunt, and there's just so much more in between. As explained in part 1 of my video, Gurney grew up with the interest in ancient cities and lost civilizations, which was the blueprint for a lot of the imagery that featured in that first book. This also continued in the second book, as no doubt these interests also influenced his concept of the lost city of Poseidos, which according to the behind the scenes segment of the book that I have, Gurney had several oil sketches of the city, with the only one revealed being a group of divers on the backs of elasmosaurs and pliosaurs on their way to explore the remains of the sunken city. But the idea was scrapped, possibly to keep the city a mystery, or because there was probably enough happening in this book. And like the first book, The World Beneath would go on to have its own set of accolades as well, also winning a Hugo Award in 1996 for Best Original Artwork, and National Geographic would approach Gurney and ask him to draw a Giganotosaurus for one of their then upcoming articles on Argentinian dinosaurs. He would accept and made 2 pieces, one with a full-body Giganotosaurus, and another with just its skull compared to a T-Rex. Whether this was the result of the book's depiction of the Giganotosaurus, or maybe they were just interested in his art style of dinosaurs as a whole, I'm not entirely sure, but regardless, Gurney would accept and created a much more grounded piece on the Giganotosaurus, at least in terms of color. Whereas he took creative liberties to give Giganotosaurus and The World Beneath a more colorful palette, he gave his Giganotosaurus that he made for National Geographic a more realistic coat depicting it running after its prey. Though Gurney later admitted that the piece is now outdated, as modern science argues that large theropods like Giganotosaurus probably didn't have the leg muscles to be running after prey as depicted in the art piece. He's even said that if he were to go back to do the painting again today, he'd change it from the dinosaur running to more of a fast walking kind of pace. It's hard to say just how well The World Beneath did in terms of numbers, but considering there would be 2 more sequels in the main Dinotopia series, I'd say the fanbase remained strong after the first book, which sold more than 2 million copies. As far as my personal thoughts go, the only real gripes I have with this book is that I feel like it could have gone into more details in certain areas. I would have loved for there to have been more of a discussion regarding the ethics of using machines that go beyond just the normal real-life good, machine and technology bad argument. I would have also loved to have seen more of the culture and systems of the carnivorous dinosaurs that inhabit the Rainy Basin, but we still have several more books to explore within this franchise, so who knows? Maybe the future installments explore more of this and all I have to do is, you know, not wait a year to cover the next book. I guess now that we're towards the end of the video, I do just want to thank everyone for your patience regarding that really long wait time for this video. When I say I'm not in a rush to push these kinds of videos out, I really do mean that. I just don't usually like subscribing to the idea of forcing myself to cover a topic I'm not interested in covering in that given time. I'd much rather wait to cover them when I feel like I'm ready because it ensures that I'm actually putting the effort behind the videos, and when it comes to the world of Dinotopia and making videos around this franchise, I really do want to do it justice. So thank you so much for understanding and for watching. I want to take this time to thank my Patreon supporters including Flag13, Garen Walker, Isaiah Cole, Kilbaro Khan, Blindberg, Eric, Julian, Galactic Breaker, PD19, Studio DM Wing, Darwinius, Gambit, and Greasy Pulsating Frog. Your support has genuinely gone a long way for this channel, and I greatly appreciate it. That's all I have to say for now. Thank you all so much for watching, and please, have a nice day.